A rat was placed alone in a metal cage. In front of it were two bottles. One had plain water, the other had water mixed with morphine. Again and again the rat chose the morphine. It drank until it could barely move. Sometimes it drank until it died. For years, this was the story people told about addiction. The drug was the monster. Once the brain tasted it, choice disappeared. Willpower disappeared. The drug became the master, but the cage was doing something too. In the late 1970s, a Canadian psychologist named Bruce Alexander noticed something almost too obvious. Every one of those rats was alone. No friends, no tunnels, no play, no mating, no dirt, no world, just a cage. So he asked a question that changed the shape of the whole story. What if the cage was not just the background? What if the cage was part of the experiment? So Alexander built a different world. He called it Rat Park. It was not a tiny metal box. It was a large plywood space on the floor of his lab, filled with other rats, wheels, food, things to climb, space to run, and enough mess to feel like a life was happening there. Then he gave those rats the same choice, plain water or morphine water, and the rats in the park mostly chose the plain water. They still tasted the morphine sometimes. They were not magic rats. The drug did not stop being a drug, but compared with the isolated rats, they wanted far less of it. In one version of the experiment, isolated male rats drank many times more morphine than the males living in Rat Park, and that result became famous because it seemed to break the old myth. Maybe addiction was not just a chemical demon hiding inside the substance. Maybe addiction was also about the world around the animal. Maybe the question was not only, what does the drug do to the brain? Maybe the question was, what kind of life is this brain trying to escape? That is the version of Rat Park that's spread everywhere. A lonely rat in a cage chooses drugs. A connected rat in a park chooses life. It is beautiful, it is simple, and that is the problem. Because Rat Park did not prove drugs are harmless, it did not prove addiction is only loneliness, it did not prove love cures everything. The original studies were small. The morphine was mixed into sweetened water, which is not how most human drug use works. Later research did not always recreate the same clean result. The cute version was too clean for a messy disease, so the internet made the opposite mistake. The old myth said, the drug is everything. The new myth said, the cage is everything. People fought over the wrong binary. Is addiction chemical or is it social? Rat Park's answer was more uncomfortable. Yes, if you only blame the drug, you miss the cage. If you only blame the cage, you underestimate the drug. But addiction is not that obedient. It is biology. It is pain. It is memory. It is access. It is habit. It is trauma. It is poverty. It is genetics. It is marketing. It is loneliness. And it is the room you are in when the craving arrives. The cage matters. The cage was real too, but the cage is not the only thing that matters. Still, Rat Park keeps coming back because the question underneath it is devastating. Why did the isolated rat want to disappear? Not why did morphine feel good. Of course morphine felt good. That was never the mystery. The mystery was why ordinary life felt so empty that the bottle became the best thing in it. And that question is not just about rats. Think about the modern human cage. A person wakes up in a small room. They touch a glowing rectangle before they touch another human being. They work all day, but nothing they do feels like it belongs to them. They eat alone, they scroll alone, they fall asleep with a screen still glowing beside their face. And around them are bottles too. Not always morphine, sometimes alcohol. Sometimes gambling, sometimes porn. Sometimes shopping, sometimes endless short videos, sometimes a game that turns loneliness into levels, sometimes work itself. Tiny doors out of the cage. Each one whispers, come here for 5 minutes, and you will not have to feel your life. That does not make every escape evil. A drink is not always addiction. A phone is not always addiction. A game is not always addiction. A drug is not always a life sentence. The danger begins when the escape becomes better than the life it is escaping from. That is the part Rat Park still gets right. A rat with a world has something to return to. A rat alone in a cage has almost nothing competing with the bottle. So if we want to understand addiction, we can not only stare at the bottle, we have to look at the cage. What kind of pain makes numbness feel reasonable? What kind of loneliness makes escape feel like relief? What kind of society gives people endless ways to disappear, but fewer reasons to stay present? This does not mean addiction is fake. It means addiction is not just a private failure inside one weak person. It is often a relationship between a person, an escape, and a world that has become too hard to inhabit sober. That is why shame fails so often. Shame points at the rat and says, "Why are you choosing the bottle?" Rat Pack points at the room and asks, "Why is the bottle the best thing in here?" And once you ask that, recovery starts to look different. It is not only removing the drug, it is rebuilding a life that can compete with the drug. People may need treatment, people may need medicine, people may need distance from the thing destroying them, and for some people that help has to be medical, long-term, and boringly practical. But they also need somewhere to go when the craving passes. A person who notices when they disappear, a body that moves, a role that matters, a future that feels less like punishment, a park, not a perfect life. Rat Park was never perfect. There was noise, conflict, mess, other rats getting in the way. But that was the point. Life was happening there. The opposite of addiction is not simply sobriety. The opposite of addiction is a life where escape is no longer the only place that feels safe. That is the addiction experiment everyone gets wrong. The drug was real, the craving was real, the danger was real. But the cage was real too. And if the cage helped create the problem, then maybe the way out is not only to punish the rat. Maybe the way out is to build a world worth staying awake for.